As he said, we're starting a brand new series today called Tuned In, How to Hear and Listen to the Voice of God. A lot of us get really busy in our life, and it's really hard to consciously tune in. And so we're starting that series, but I'm also kind of closing off the last series we did, because you'll see the tie-in just a second. You know, we just went through a series called 72 Hours, and I loved that series personally. Just taking each day, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and unpacking all the events that happened on those days. We are going to continue on a little bit because we're taking a story today that is going to blow you away if you haven't heard it before, but it happened on Sunday right after Jesus rose from the dead. All right? You know, when Jesus rose, this is one of those things that kind of blow me away. Because he did not appear to a whole lot of people the day he arose. It was very selective, very selective. In fact, if you just look around you today, there's more people in this room than who witnessed his resurrection on Sunday. And I say that because that is such a weird thought even for me. Because if I were Jesus, I would want to make a big splash. Wouldn't you? I would hold some sort of press conference. Hey, bring the cameras in here. I'd be taking some selfies, you know. Jesus didn't do none of that. I think I probably would have showed up at the front door of Pontius Pilate and said, hey, remember me? You know, I'm the guy that you sentenced to death 2 days ago. Well, I'm back. How do you like them apples? Or something along that line. You know, he was very selective in who he appeared to. And we're going to read about a story where he just comes alongside and journeys with two disciples from Jerusalem to Emmaus. And I love this story. This is the most incredible walk in the whole Bible. But before we even get into that, I want to draw your attention to this picture here of this chest. And I don't know if you see a lot of these. I know in my day, this was fairly common, where a girl would have one of these in her bedroom or house somewhere. In anticipation of the day she would get married and have a family, she would collect treasured objects to put in this chest, china, linen, lace, family heirlooms, that she would hope to pass on to her kids one day. Anybody here know what these chests were called? Hope chests. Exactly. Hope chests. A place where you would put things that express what you're dreaming for, what you're longing for, what you're hoping for. Several years back, my family bought a weightlifting set, and it was kind of a hope chest deal to me because I thought if I would do it, I would be hoping to have a chest one day. That was such a pastor joke. The truth of it is this. All of us have a hope chest somewhere. All of us have a place where we store our hopes, our dreams, the things we're longing for. And I think there's a good reason for this. Because humans are just irrepressible hopers. That's why kids go crazy during Christmas, because of the hope involved. That's why students maybe go to college in hopes that they could get a better job. That's why investors buy real estate. That's why people invest so much money into gym memberships, because they're hoping for something different. See, all of us have hopes. All of us have a hope chest somewhere, a place where we place our highest hopes, our most treasured dreams. And I guess what I'm wondering today as we begin is, what box have you decided to put your hope in? And have you placed your hope in the right box? There are lots of things we put in our hope chests. Maybe it could be represented by one of these. Most of you know what this is. If you have a little kid, maybe you have one in your house right now. I knew I grew up with a piggy bank. And you know what I love to do with my piggy bank? Take it and just shake it. Can you hear that sound? That's a glorious sound, okay? And maybe you grew up loving the sound of shaking the piggy bank, addicted to that sound. And maybe you grew up to love that sound so much that you decided to put your hope in a box that says, once I have enough money, once I'm financially secure, and I can endure all other kinds of problems as long as I got enough money. But as we have seen, the economic times can shift, and even this last year during COVID, maybe some of us have come to the point where we're saying, maybe I put my hope in the wrong chest. Maybe you haven't been hit so hard in the midst of this economic storm, but you've got more money than you probably ever had in your life. And yet, if you're real honest, you're more miserable. It's got you drinking more. It's got you fighting more. You're escaping more, and you wonder if you didn't put your hope in the wrong chest. Have you ever received one of these? Maybe for a little league team or a soccer team or a gymnastics meet or a dance or speech or band competition or some sort of academic recognition. It felt pretty good, didn't it? To have a trophy that you could take home and put on a shelf somewhere. And sometimes we grow up thinking, maybe I ought to put all my hope in the box of achievement. And so you chase the dream, you got an education, you got a job, you got a position, you have established a reputation of a high achiever. And people are looking at you as a person who gets things done. But for some reason, it hasn't brought you the inner satisfaction that you thought it would. And you end up thinking that maybe I put my hope in the wrong chest. Another thing we could put in our hope chest is, remember the first time you fell in love? Felt pretty good, didn't it? The thought that somebody might even like me, that she noticed me, that somebody's interested in me, somebody might have a thing for me. That's awesome. And so a lot of us started putting our hope in the box of relationships. And we thought, man, if I could just find the right person. And so you went on a search for the right person, and when you found him or her, you weren't so happy. So you assumed that maybe that wasn't the right person, and that was the wrong person. So you go on and find another right person, and maybe you've been through 2, 3, 4 right persons. And after several broken relationships or a broken marriage or two, you say, maybe, just maybe, my hope was in the wrong box. Man, you have to turn open your Bible or your iPad or phone or whatever to Luke chapter 24, because you have to just get into this story. This is an amazing story that we get to unpack today. On Easter Sunday, following the crucifixion, death, and burial of Jesus, 2 of Jesus' friends, 2 disciples, found themselves losing hope. And the events and circumstances of the previous 48 hours had not gone the way they had planned. And so this is the way the story starts out. 2 disciples are walking down this rocky road. This is probably the most famous road or walk in the entire Bible. And we pick it up in verse 13. It says this: the same day, that's referring to the third day, Sunday, so he had just risen from the dead. On the same day, 2 of Jesus' followers were walking to the village of Emmaus. Man, I don't know why my mind just went blank. Emmaus, 7 miles from Jerusalem. Okay? Now, in the Greek, how many people know what 7 miles means? 7 miles. Good, okay? It means 7 miles. This is a much more important question. How long does it take an average person to walk 7 miles? Anybody know? An average person can walk 3.5 miles an hour, so that would make a 7-mile walk 2 hours, all right? So this was a 2-hour walk. And it says in verse 14, as they walked along, they were talking about everything that had happened. They had a lot to decompress. They had probably been in Jerusalem for a while following Jesus. They were probably there the week before on Palm Sunday when he rode in on a donkey. They were thinking like everybody else, oh, here it comes. Jesus is going to lead us in victory against the Romans. He's going to kick them out. But then they saw the turn of events during that week. And on Friday, where he was arrested and put on trial and crucified, and then Saturday, where it was just silent and everybody had their mouths open going, I don't know what's going on. On Sunday, more than likely, they were thinking, man, they had heard the crowd say, crucify him on Friday. They were thinking, man, they're not going to stop with Jesus. They're going to come after us as disciples, as followers of Jesus as well. So I am going to back out. I'm going to try to get out of here and go back to Emmaus. And the very interesting thing happens in verse 15. As they talked and discussed these things, Jesus himself suddenly came and began walking with them. But God kept them from recognizing him. Have you ever wanted to find out what your friends talk about you when you're not around? Jesus had that ability. He's kind of asserts himself, and they're talking about Jesus. Now, there's actually a medical condition called face blindness, and it's when you can recognize objects, you can recognize colors, you can recognize shapes, but for some reason, you have a hard time recognizing faces, even people that you love, like mom, your dad, sons, daughters, even a spouse. I don't know what kind of face blindness these two guys had, but they're standing face to face with the very one they're talking about, and they don't know it's Jesus. All right? They had left everything. These two guys are incredibly discouraged, taking the 7-mile journey. They had left everything to follow Jesus. He is now dead, gone, sealed in the tomb for all they know. They thought that Jesus was the Messiah and that he was going to come and deliver them from the Roman oppression and occupation. They were so tired of the Roman soldiers in their streets and sidewalks. They were so tired of paying Roman oppressive taxes. And they thought that this Jesus was the one who was going to change all that. This young, smart, wise, supernatural leader would set them free. So Jesus, who they didn't recognize, get this, just put yourself in this situation. They didn't recognize, asked them. He asked them in verse 17, what are you discussing so intently as you walk along? They stop short. So in other words, they're walking, they're trekking, they have a 2-hour journey, and they stop, and they look at him with this face of like incredulousness, sadness writ across their faces. And one of them, Cleopas, replied, you must be the only person in Jerusalem who hasn't heard about all the things that have happened here the last few days. Can you hear it in his voice? Like, what planet are you from? Did you just, dig yourself out from under a rock? Which I think it would have been really funny if Jesus was, well, as a matter of fact, a little bit earlier this morning, I did that. Yep. But Jesus plays along. What things, he asks? The things that happened to Jesus, the man from Nazareth. They said he was a prophet who did powerful miracles, that he was a mighty teacher in the eyes of God and all the people. But our leading priests and other religious leaders handed him over to be condemned to death. And you can hear their voice dropping here. And they crucified him. And here's what happened, what they say next. We had hoped he was the Messiah who would come to rescue Israel. This all happened 3 days ago. Now I want you to focus on those first 3 words. But we had hoped. In other words, they're saying we had placed all our hope in one box. And apparently it was the wrong box, because life is just not turning out the way we thought it would turn out. We had put our hope in this Jesus, and now he's dead. But we had hoped. Man, I think there's a lot of us in this room, if not every one of us in this room, that have said those words. But we had hoped. We had hoped this was going to be a position, a career, a job that I've always dreamed of. We had hoped that the company downsizing wouldn't impact me. We had hoped that we were going to be able to hold on to our house, or maybe hold on to our business a few more months, maybe a few more years. But we had hoped we could have a child, or another child, or maybe even somebody else's child through adoption. We had hoped that we had seen the last of cancer in our family. We had hoped our son, our daughter was finally going to get their act together. We had hoped our marriage was going to last forever. Man, these guys are devastated. And they still think that Jesus is dead and in the tomb. So how does Jesus respond? He sees the devastation on their faces. You would think they would, maybe come alongside and say, man, I feel your pain. I've been there. I know what you're going through. Maybe even paused, and had them and gathered them together and prayed for him, right? You would expect Jesus, a good shepherd, to do that. But no, how's this for a tender response? Then Jesus said to them, you foolish people. Whoa. You find it so hard to believe all that the prophets wrote in the scriptures. Wasn't it clearly predicted that the Messiah would have to suffer all these things before entering his glory? And then verse 27, then Jesus took them through the writings of Moses and all the prophets, explaining from all the scriptures the things concerning himself. So Jesus taught while the three of them walked 7 miles. Question, how much time did Jesus have to give this sermon? 2 hours. Exactly. So everyone buckle in. I'm not even looking over there toward Justin. We don't know exactly what Jesus taught during that walk, but we do know it was about him. And starting with Moses and the Old Testament prophets and the work of the Messiah, Jesus is saying to them, man, I had to go through this. It was part of the process. It was part of God's plan. And you have to go through it too. Now get this. He's saying, I'm not going to take this road away from you, but I will walk it with you. You may not even recognize me here. I'm here with you now, but I'm walking beside you, even though through the most difficult of times, I will stay by your side until you get home. And when they got to Emmaus, they asked Jesus, who of course didn't know was Jesus, to stay with them because the day was almost over. And in verse 30, it says, as they sat down to eat, he took the bread and blessed it. Then he broke it and gave it to them. Suddenly, their eyes were opened and they recognized him. Can you imagine? Like, whoa, he was here all along. At that moment, he disappeared. They said to each other, didn't our hearts burn within us as he talked with us on the road and explained the scriptures to us? The very next verse, they got up, and instead of walking back to Jerusalem, the Bible says they hightailed it. They ran back to Jerusalem to gather with the disciples and say, gang, Jesus is alive. We walked 7 miles with him. We had a 2-hour sermon. We had a meal. We've seen him. It was the most amazing walk in the entire Bible. Now, every one of you has been on a similar road. And I bet many of you are traveling down roads right now, and they kind of look rough and rocky. It's a road of disappointment. It's a road of difficulty. It might be painful. It's full of suffering. A road of broken dreams when life has not turned out the way you thought it would. I've been able to have the opportunity to walk with lots and lots of people down these roads, and there's typically 2 very distinct responses that people have. One is that they look to their past, and they say, man, based on that past, my life is pretty much doomed. I am a result of everything that happened in my past. Or there's some people that look to the future, but they don't see any hope in the future. They just think it's going to be more of the present. So I just kind of want to talk about both of those as we close here. Because the resurrection of Jesus Christ gives us hope for a brand new identity. Now, when you look in a mirror, what are you usually looking at? Yourself, right? Most of us. But there are mirrors that don't have you look at yourself, but it just helps you look to what's behind you, like a rear view mirror in a car. right? So you could see all the activity of the cars behind you. One of the reasons these disciples walking down this road are so down and so discouraged is that they're feeling like failures. They're full of regret over their past. And in the aftermath of Jesus' arrest and the trial and the crucifixion, they totally abandoned Jesus. At that time, Jesus needed them the most. They turned their back on the one they claimed to love. And now, feeling like failures, they're saying to themselves, can you believe how easily we caved? How easily we bailed when things got tough? You know, I have an incredible pastor that I absolutely love. His name's Mike Bro. And he kind of writes about this in one of his books. And he contends that this is a form of identity theft. Now, a lot of us, when we think of identity theft, we're thinking about our information, our personal information getting stolen on the internet and our resources getting taken from us without us even knowing sometimes. But he says a far worse part of identity theft is when we come into life with a distorted or marred or confused or even a damaged identity. The truth of the matter is that many of us feel defined by our past. Events that have happened to us, circumstances, mistakes maybe that we've made. Yeah, I know everybody has a different opinion about this, but I graduated just a few years ago from high school, lots of years ago. And every 5 years, maybe every 10 years, I receive an invitation for what is known as a high school reunion, all right? And maybe some of you go to high school reunions. I have yet to go to one. And it's a very almost selfish reason. I know this, okay? Because I don't want to harm the cause of Christ by going back to my high school reunion. In high school, I was a mess. I was the biggest troublemaker probably in the school. I was arrested several times. I knew how to play the game on Sunday when I went to church with my family. But man, did I live like the world during the week. And you know, friends, if my life were defined by my past, I wouldn't be here today. Who do you see when you look in the mirror? What's your identity? Some of you grew up in homes where you heard words that devalued you, that wrecked you, that damaged you. Maybe words like, you're just not smart enough. You're not good enough. You're not fast enough. You're not pretty enough. You'll never amount to anything. And maybe those words came from people that were supposed to love you or encourage you or coach you. Some of you grew up in homes where you were not just abused with words, you were abused physically and emotionally. And some even abused in some unspeakable sexual ways. Some of you carry shame over things that you've done in your past and things done to you. Sometimes life doesn't turn out the way we planned. Sometimes we don't turn out the way we planned. There's an amazing verse that is one of my all-time favorite Easter verses that Pastor Justin talked about last week, found in 1 Peter chapter 1. It says this, in his great mercy. See, God sees us in those hurting places in our lives, in this identity that we have a hard time letting go of. In his great mercy, he has given us a new birth into a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. Now notice the phrase new birth. It's not referring to reincarnation or something really weird. He's talking about what happens when someone becomes a follower of Jesus. They receive a new identity because you begin to understand my past doesn't define me, but who I belong to defines me. I am a much loved, valued, treasured son of the Most High God, daughter of the Most High God. Who defines my worth when he paid a high price, when he made a staggering sacrifice for me and my past and my sin with his only son. So no matter who you are, what your past, Who do you look at when you look at yourself in the mirror? Can you understand that beauty can come from ashes? Our past doesn't define us any longer. When you get your hope in the right box, the empty tomb of Jesus, and understanding you are a new creation, the old is gone, the new has come, you receive a new identity about your past. What if today you actually put your faith and hope in the right box? What if you left your old identity behind and left here with a brand new identity? What if you said, God, I acknowledge today that I need a new birth, and I want to receive a new birth through what Jesus Christ did on the cross when he established my worth. Wouldn't that be unbelievable? Many of you maybe are not looking back at the road behind you. You're looking in front. And you're looking at some of the circumstances that you know you're going to have to face tomorrow. You know you're going to have to face next month and this year. And there, you have a lot of good reasons to feel afraid, maybe powerless, discouraged, broken. But you know what the resurrected Jesus Christ came to give you? A transformed perspective. You need to see your current situations maybe in a different set of lenses. And maybe you need to open your mind to the possibility that the end in your mind is not truly the end. Man, these two disciples on the road to Emmaus needed hope for their circumstances. It's amazing how in the 7-mile walk with Jesus, followed by dinner and the breaking of bread and prayer, it changed the perspective of these disciples from down in the dumps to running back to Jerusalem. Man, that's such an interesting verse that Paul writes in Ephesians chapter 4. It says, instead, let the Spirit renew your thoughts and attitudes. There is an attitude in your mind that produces hope if it's renewed. So it's a great truth in that verse. The question is, how do I let the Spirit renew my thoughts and attitudes? How do I actually tune in and be able to listen? How do I see God around us? How do I hear God when so many other things compete for my attention and my affection? Man, over these next few weeks, we're going to learn about this together, and I'm so excited for this series, Tuned In. We are going to go on a journey to discover some principles and rhythms for our life to help us connect and hear God's voice more clearly than we've ever heard. You know, I know I'm dating myself a little bit, but I grew up in a home that didn't have cable TV, if you remember, or smart TVs where they're just connected through Wi-Fi. The TV that I used to watch was a big box with some antennas on the top called rabbit ears. Exactly. Those were the most ineffective antennas ever. There was never a clear picture, right? And so you'd turn on a channel, and when you switch a channel, you'd have to adjust those rabbit ears. Did anybody have to do, I was the youngest in my family, so anybody have to do what I did? You know, I had to grab the rabbit ears, and somehow your body became an extension of the antenna. And you'd have to do these weird poses until your family would say, stop, freeze, because the picture finally came in clearly. You know, I got to thinking about that because God's voice to us is like these radio waves. They're filling the atmosphere and available at any moment of any day. But we need to learn how to tune our hearts to the frequency of heaven, to dial into God's presence and hear God's voice above all the other noise that comes at us each moment of every day. You know, how long has it been since you have said, like these two disciples on the road to Emmaus, there was a burning in my heart. It was like God was trying to say something, and I didn't really clearly hear it. I didn't recognize it. You know, it's easy for us to stumble through the roads of life, looking but never seeing, listening but never hearing. But that doesn't have to be what your relationship with Jesus looks like. We could experience so much more, and we're going to dive into it in these next few weeks. You know, those guys on the road to Emmaus had lost their hope. They had said to a stranger, who they didn't know was Jesus, who was walking with them on that 7-mile journey, but we had hoped that he was the one that was going to redeem Israel. But what they didn't understand was that they were staring hope right in the face. Hope was right under their nose. All they had to do was get their hope in the right box. I have a sense that many of you came here today feeling like life hasn't turned out the way you planned. That you maybe haven't turned out the way you planned. You look at yourself in the mirror, and for whatever reason, you don't like the person you see. Or you look at the circumstances in front of you and you just want to give up, throw in the towel. Please hear me. Because of the living hope, Jesus Christ, you can get a new identity. And on top of that, you can get a brand new perspective. And I have a feeling today that what you may not know is how close you are to experiencing hope that is staring you right in the face. I believe that God has brought us to this moment so that some of you listening today could be reached and be made brand new by the power of God. And you could put your hope in the right box, the empty tomb of Jesus Christ. You've heard the message today about a new identity and a new perspective. And you felt a little bit of that burning in your heart. And you hear that God can give you these things through the living hope, Jesus Christ. But listen to me, listen so clearly. If you only hear it, then you've stopped at mile 6. What I love about this story in Luke is a 7-mile miracle. And these 2 disciples on the road to Emmaus, it was at the end of their journey that actually represented the beginning of their journey with Jesus Christ, with their hope in the right box. It is also the beginning of the journey of tuning in, to truly listening to God's voice in your life. So I'm going to ask that we just bow our heads in this moment. If you're online, you could bow your heads with us. If you've never invited Jesus into your life, today could be your day. Why don't you just express your heart and pray something like this, a simple prayer silently in your heart. Say something, God, I don't really fully understand it all, but I realize today that you've offered me hope through your Son, Jesus Christ. And today, right now, I accept your offer. Would you forgive my sins? Erase my guilt. Give me a new identity. Help me to change. Would you give me a new perspective, a new mindset? So that even these circumstances that didn't turn out the way I planned, I could put my hope in the right box. So today, Jesus Christ, I ask you to come into my life and be the leader of my life because I want to follow you. Also, many of you have already made this decision. You're already a believer. I invite you to pray something like this silently in your own heart. Father, today I again understand that you are the hope of the world and the only hope of my life. Thank you for the hope of a new identity that I am grateful for every day. Thank you for a new perspective on the circumstances that I'm in right now because of the living hope, Jesus Christ. God, I am so grateful for the hope chest outside of Jerusalem 2,000 years ago that could not contain the body of Jesus. Father, that's where I want to put my hope. That's where we want to put our hope. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.